Thank you for staying. I would like to bring back our director, Cory Finley. Hello. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. This premiered at Sundance. This is your directorial debut film, which is quite unbelievable because I feel like from the story, the cast, the score, just everything was amazing for your first feature. But before, what inspired this story?
So the movie began as a play. That's my background. I've been writing plays in New York for 5 or 6 years. And I think any time I start a play, I don't often know, I don't know exactly what the story is going to be. I don't often even know exactly sort of what theme or question I'm investigating. It often just starts with something that sort of freaks me out on a deep level, and that piece in this was sort of the violent euthanasia of a horse. And there was something about that sort of that act and the kind of person who would do that sort of thing and would be able to sort of feel that it was the moral right thing to do that was compelling. And that was sort of the seed of Amanda's character. And then I think Lily's character sort of developed in some ways as a response to that personality. And I just sort of started letting the two of them talk. And after many, many iterations, I arrived at sort of the thrillery version of the story that became the screenplay eventually.
Yeah, I feel like the screenplay was so knit tight. Their interactions and chemistry was, it was such a rare and yet unique interaction to see, especially because you already felt like they knew each other, they had a history. And even in the opening scene when they first meet, you still feel some kind of connection. And I felt like in that scene, it told you so much about these two characters and how they respond and who they are. How was the casting process? Because this cast was incredible. Anya Taylor-Joy, Olivia Cook, Anton Yelchin.
Yeah, absolutely. We were incredibly fortunate to get our top choices for all three of those roles. Can everyone hear me? Is this on?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Good. I was just a huge fan of all three of those actors. With Amanda, I knew very specifically that we needed an actor who could make a lot out of a very narrow emotional range, and who could keep sort of what was essentially like a movie-long deadpan interesting and varied and sort of complicated. And Olivia had, in all of her sort of previous film work, I'd always thought that she was, one of her many strengths was her ability to kind of execute a very interesting comic deadpan. And then Anya, I had just seen The Witch, an amazing movie, if any of you have not checked it out, that had just come out when we were casting this. And I was just so impressed by how her ability to kind of ground extremely, sort of the opposite of the deadpan, to ground sort of extremely huge operatic emotions and make them feel really real. And Anton, I just loved all of his film work. I thought he has sort of a natural vulnerability and is just an actor that you always really care about on screen, and just an incredibly, imaginative and dynamic performer. So super fortunate to work with all three of them, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like I don't think I could imagine another actress playing these characters. I feel like they became them so easily, and they were very haunting, to say the least. I know this was one of Anton Yelchin's last film. How was it working with him?
It was just really wonderful working with him. He was on set for a pretty brief period, but I think in that period, just kind of became everyone's favorite person on set. It was just such a sort of kind, generous guy, such a dynamic performer, such an incredible improviser. There are a lot of bits of his improvisation and sort of crazy, zany ideas that have made it into the final cut. So obviously a really horribly sad loss with Anton, but super fortunate to have worked with him.
Yeah, his role was so terrific. I don't think I've seen anybody look that vulnerable.
Can't hear you.
Oh. Hello?
Better, thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know. I feel like you can't hear me, but okay. I was saying that I just thought his performance, even though it was so brief, it was so incredible, his vulnerability and how he was victimized by these two girls was very scary. But let's talk about the cinematography. I feel like it was like roaming around the house, taunting us, especially with that gnawing score. So let's talk about the cinematography and the score.
Sure. So Lyle Vincent shot the movie. He was a cinematographer, an incredibly talented guy and a great collaborator. We talked a lot about sort of drawing on, sort of visual tropes of film noir. We felt that among many other things, the movie's kind of a neo-noir, and we were interested in sort of doing a lot with light and shadow, and then you talked about kind of moving around the house. I think that there's always a danger when adapting a play that you're going to have a very static movie, and so we were always looking for ways just to let the movie move, to let the audience move, and we talked a lot about The Shining and the way that sort of the Steadicam in that movie, seems to cover every inch of the overlook, and we wanted to do the same thing with an incredible location that we were fortunate to find. And then Eric Friedlander did the score, and he's an amazing cellist, and sort of came up in kind of the avant-garde New York downtown classical and jazz scene, and is an amazing improviser himself. And because kind of Lyle's cinematography was so sort of lush and sort of glamorous in places, I wanted to be sure that the score would kind of cut against that and give us an interesting tension. And so we wanted it to sound, to sound ugly at times.
Did you give him directions, or did he kind of just watch some scenes and just go at it?
It was definitely a collaboration. We knew when we brought him on that we were interested in something that was very percussive and very, and it wasn't always, it was occasionally atonal, and something that would sort of bring a roughness to the movie. But he found, as is always true with an awesome composer, he found some really interesting creative ways and sounds and instruments with which to do that.
Yeah, it was incredible. I felt like it made the film just that much more haunting in so many ways. I'm actually going to open it up to questions. Here you go. Go ahead.
Yeah, there seems to be a spate of movies lately, like I just saw Thelma, and then you have Sofia Coppola's Beguiled, where, the present political climate of female agency is taking the form of a certain amount of, horror and noirish, lashing out at, and killing men. I'm just wondering, is this are you kind of focused on that present, zeitgeist, or when you were making this, or did you just find that just coincidental?
Sure. So it was, the movie was written during a at least slightly different political climate, but I think the seeds of the present climate were all present within it, as is always true. But I think I didn't initially set out to sort of explore anything particular about gender. I think that, in choosing female protagonists, I think that there's always, you're in any movie, regardless of the gender of the protagonist, you were saying something about gender. And I think in a way, having the protagonists have a number of things about their life that are different from my own, including their gender, almost gave me a certain amount of safety to explore some very dark sides of myself without feeling that it was too close for comfort. And so I feel like the characters are both very, there's sort of an uncomfortable amount of me in them, or at least the way I see myself in my darker moments. And then there's also hopefully a little bit of a sort of satirical lens on them. but in a way that doesn't keep us from investing in them, would be my hope. So I guess that's a roundabout way of answering the question, but I was not specifically making a movie about sort of violently dismantling the patriarchy, but I am glad for that to be one of many interpretations of the movie.
Go ahead.
Thanks. One thing that really struck me as being great about the movie was the sound design, and particularly at the beginning, when there's, takes a while before you hear any real dialogue. Can you just talk a little bit about what went into that and what your intent was with the sound design?
Sure. So the sound design, similar to what I was saying about the kind of camera movement, we wanted to find every possible way to make the story cinematic and not have it just feel like a filmed play. And I think going in kind of a subjective, sort of an expressionistic direction with the sound design was another way to do that, was to use the tools of film. And the particularly sort of the ergometer sound came about pretty early in the process of turning it from a play into a screenplay, and was a little bit of like a Telltale Heart inspired touch. We knew that Mark, Paul Sparks' character, has a pretty small amount of time that he's on screen, but he has a pretty huge influence over the story and over the characters, and so we wanted to find a way to bring his presence not into every scene, but into some of the scenes where he wasn't physically present. And Gene Park is did the sound mix for the film, and is an amazing designer and sort of artist of all things auditory.
Thank you.
Can you tell us when this is going to come out?
Yes, this will come out in March.
March.
Theater near you.
Yeah, look out for that.
Tell your friends.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a pleasure, and please be sure to vote for this film as it is eligible for the American Independent